Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Yes, how's it going? This is Concept of Thought, myself, a literate author, and Daisy Drage. This is our track called Misty Blue, produced by Joe Crawford. Much love, thanks for listening.
When the misty night turns into something beautiful, misty night, misty night. When the misty night turns into something beautiful, misty night, misty night. When the misty night turns into something beautiful, misty night, misty night. When that misty night turns into something beautiful, beautiful.
Sure, yeah, misty blue, figures in the distance grew bigger as I took another swig and tried to hit my dude. Flip the mood, moonlit views got me thinking of you and all the dreams that you couldn't pursue. Too young to prove a diminishing youth is less irrelevant. Clues in the movement of roots as they're developing. All crystal memories I clutch in my palms, stuck in the past, stardust cutting my palms up. The answer is too vast for the basic brain of today. You've got to look into tomorrow if you guess today to escape, invest in hate, projection of rage to motivate the sun. And I'm still trying to find a way to run. I'm patient, I'm waiting for this day to come. Raise your jug, this is dedicated to the place we used to chill. Misty Hill, in between the chill with the crispy feels. Sun-kissed frost got me lost and my vision's still vivid. Welcome to a world made of solitude, capturing perspectives evolve with the sun and moon. Nothing new, now I never knew that we could have grew. Rude for presuming true. Welcome to Misty Blue Hill. Welcome to Misty Blue Hill. Welcome to Misty Blue Hill. Welcome to Misty Blue. Welcome to Misty Blue. Welcome to Misty Blue Hill.
When the misty night turns into something beautiful, misty night, misty night. When the misty night turns into something beautiful, misty night, misty night.
I see beautiful hills surfacing, merging in the fog, sun burning on the rocks, birds circling the top, earth urging me to stop and take a minute or two to see the pretty view glisten through the misty blue. Misty blue misses you, get me out when I'm down and the clouds are about to erupt. Bountiful mountains surround. I grew up looking down on the town that I'm proud to be from, and nothing can change the past. I'm still raising a glass at every mate who never made it this far. Many memories remain in my heart, from the days at the Grange in the haze to the gaze in the stars we were waiting for a chance to take. That's how this whole life is. Time is a passing phase in a cage that you can't escape. Up late, stargazing, grasping the vastness of space. Hard days we would laugh away, like we never had the chance whilst grafting a marginal wage. This sun-kissed place where I'm standing, in fact, is where I established the stanzas I rap. So here's to the moments of madness we had, and the misty blue mornings that vanished to black. Yeah, here's to the madness we had in the misty blue mornings.
When the misty night turns into something beautiful. Misty night, misty night. When the misty night turns into something beautiful. Misty night, misty night.
This next track, Voices.
Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay. Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay.
Don't do anything stupid or right. I got plenty of grooves that will soothe your mind and heal your scars. You can reveal your past here, darling, even if it's dark and tarnished. We won't judge the decisions you've made in life. Seat yourself back and listen to the way we rhyme. Maybe we can change your mind or talk to you when things ain't going the way you like. You know that it's okay to cry. Struggling's made a fight and we're all a bit afraid at times. I hope this won't be pointless. You know the skies are grey and the system exploits us, but I've lost too many of my friends through the wrong choices. They chose to listen to the voices, but you don't have to. I wonder whether they'd be thankful for this advice if they still had control of their life. Not a single day goes by. I search for answers, but I still don't know why. And that's the question you'll be leaving us with. You're a creature with a need to exist. It won't be easy, but believe me, people forgive. And that's a good reason to change. So step outside in the rain and feel it relieving the pain. The choice is yours. You can fight the war or you'll die for the cause.
Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay. Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay.
Yeah, don't do anything too sudden or right. I've got plenty of rhymes that can change your mind. So sit back and listen to the sound of the earth. Life's bright if you stop and observe. Like a flock of some birds, or green grass glistening and frostbitten. Another day you'll be grateful that you're not missing. The plot thickens into cream if you let it be. The 7 wonders, 7 seas if you want to reach. Nah, it's nothing deep, just another bright option. Butterflies lost in the summertime. Conscious there's other life boxed in this maritime mosh pit. Too many people lost at sea at the cost of not speaking. We're doing mad drugs at the weekend. It's deep, it doesn't have to be. Read between the facts to see the cracks that we can have, but lack to show to any family or friend. Sorry if you're stuck in your head. Sorry if you feel like you're just kind of stuck in a bend. Full of regrets, depressed and can't get out of bed. What I said, keep your head high, read and find purpose. Speak back your feelings and keep the fire burning. I'm not certain, but I reckon you'll be fine, kid. Pebbles in your mind turn to pebbles on the island, so revel in the silence. Devil on my mind, but I reckon he's declining. Second I decide to be better, I'll be fine. I ain't sweating, it's just timing.
Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay. Many ways to seize the day. Life goes on and the seasons change. Hold my hand and I'll guide the way. Just know that I need you to stay. And I can see you want to cry. And I will find a reason why. If I could help to get you by, would you even let me try?
Welcome to TEDx at University of Sussex. I'd like to start off this event by thanking the Concept of Thought for such an amazing performance. My name is Chloe and I'm going to be the host for this entire event. This event is based on the theme of Together Apart, and in the last year, Together Apart has been such a fundamental concept that we've all had to learn. It means coming together in a sense of community, even though we're all many miles apart in the face of the lockdown. Throughout this event, due to the lockdown, we're going to take you all on a little journey around the sightseeing sites of Brighton. This is to share a sort of sense of community with all Brightonians and all the Sussex community, to show you the sites that everyone cares deeply about and has missed over this lockdown. Now, besides the talks, we're going to be hosting some interactive social media games, we're going to be hosting a wellbeing space, and there's going to be a number of performances up and down throughout the event. Throughout, we're going to be live tweeting, live blogging, and updating our Insta stories, so make sure you check out all the information on the links below. To start off this tour, I'd like to introduce everyone to the University of Sussex. So let's start off this journey today with our first speaker. I'd like to introduce ND Dara, who is a medical student at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. Dara writes extensively in trauma, oppression, immigration and femininity, drawing on her Kurdish heritage. She's a passionate believer in activism surrounding global and local injustices. She brings to light stories of racism within healthcare experienced both by herself and her colleagues, and explores reasons why it's everyone's responsibility to speak out. I invite all audience members to sit back and experience Dara's stories while we go and head out into Brighton. We'll see you after.
A recent report highlighted that the UK is not institutionally racist, but many people's lived experiences tell a different story. A story of racism in our schools and our workplaces. I'm a trainee doctor, and I want to focus today on our medical schools. In my view, racism in the NHS isn't just harming the people on the receiving end, but it is also harming the nation's health too. Did you know that 40% of medical undergraduates are from ethnic minority backgrounds? Medical schools are more diverse than they have ever been. And higher education institutes are placing more importance on diversity and making university more accessible to those who would not traditionally go on to obtain degrees. That means our future NHS workforce will be more diverse than ever, yet racism towards our medical students and doctors of ethnic minority backgrounds is still very common. A study by the British Medical Association and the British Medical Journal has highlighted that medical schools in the UK are not well prepared to deal with racism and racial harassment, which is experienced by medical students from ethnic minority backgrounds. And in a Freedom of Information request, it was found that only about half of medical schools collect data on racial harassment. In 2019, UK universities only recorded 560 complaints of racial harassment over 3.5 years, while 60,000 students said they made a complaint. For this reason, the British Medical Association launched a charter for medical schools to prevent and effectively deal with racism and racial harassment, as well as guidance for students. It is vital that our universities do not hide incidents of racism to protect their own image. Although higher education institutes and medical schools have been trying to tackle the issue of racism over the past year, much more needs to be done as racism is still very common. Now, if medical students are resigned to the likelihood that nothing will be done if they report racial incidents, they are likely not to bother. Instead, they tolerate and they internalize this humiliation, hoping it won't happen again. Student stories and statistics of racism should no longer be waved away as an aberration or as a minor part of some people's experiences. For many students of colour and for Muslim students, racism is a constant in their lives. It is woven into their entire journey to becoming a doctor, from worrying that the scarves on their heads will affect their likelihood of attaining a place at medical school, to worrying that patients on the wards will make a racist remark, to the constant fear that once they do graduate, their chances of progressing through their career is significantly lower than that of their English colleagues. Now, there are many forms of racism, but I want to focus on racism experienced by Muslim medical students today. My hijab-wearing friends often tell me about incidents of racism they experienced on the wards. Most of the time, they feel that they cannot turn to anyone to report the racism, as they believe nothing can be done about it, and they're so used to it that they just let it slide. I want to give a voice to their stories. It is important these stories are highlighted and we all acknowledge that racism happens in our hospitals. Unfortunately, a large proportion of white British people believe that the UK is not racist, while they themselves hold racist beliefs. To protect the identities of the victims, I will change their names. Amira is a hijab-wearing medical student. As part of her training, it is essential that she speaks to all kinds of patients, examines them, and learns how to treat them. Amira approaches a patient, introducing herself and gaining consent to ask a few questions. The patient says to Amira, "Take that ugly thing off your head." Amira remains professional and calm and continues with her questions. The patient does not want to listen and says, "I'm not going to tell you anything. Are there no English doctors around here? You're not even British." Amira tells the patient she is British and she was actually born in London. The patient continues to insist that Amira is not British and should go back to her own country if she wants to cover her hair. At this point, Amira realizes that continuing the conversation will only upset her, as she already feels embarrassed. She excuses herself and tells the patient she will send a doctor to take the history. Feeling that no one will be able to help and being used to racist comments, Amira decides not to report the incident. However, she admits that it has lowered her self-esteem, and after this incident, she always feared the comments patients could potentially make about her headscarf. Unfortunately, Amira no longer wears a headscarf. She says patients take her a lot more seriously now. Sarah is a hijab-wearing medical student. Sarah wears a hijab and covers from head to toe. This includes when she's on placement. When she goes to see a patient with 2 English students, the patient says to Sarah that everyone is British except her. When Sarah tells the patient she is also British, the patient demands Sarah tells her what her real ethnicity is. Sarah tells the patient she's only there to take a history and that her ethnicity is not relevant. The patient tells Sarah she must be ashamed of admitting her true identity because it is where terrorists are from. Sarah feels out of place and she feels ashamed. She fights back tears, and although her colleagues appear shocked by the incident, they don't say anything. Sarah lets her colleagues take over and takes a step back. It's not the first time she has been called a terrorist, nor is it the first time that she has been made to feel like she doesn't belong, or that wearing a marker of her faith makes her unsafe. She has previously tried to cover up her Muslim identity by wearing a hoodie over her hijab, or trousers instead of loose-fitted dresses. Sarah soon realizes that even if she were to remove her headscarf, it wouldn't stop racist comments. She says no one should have to hide their faith in order to fit in or feel more accepted. On the way to the hospital, Adam was told to go back to his own country. Adam brushes this comment off and continues his commute. At the hospital, Adam heads upstairs to leave his belongings in the office. Before going to the ward, Adam asks the nurse if he could leave his bag and his coat in the office. The nurse responds with this: "As long as there is no bomb in there." Although Adam feels offended, he laughs the comment off. He heads to the ward to speak to the patient. He approaches the patient to take a history. Midway through the questions, the patient says to Adam, "Your English is really good for someone who is in English. How long have you been in this country?" Adam is familiar with this question and responds by telling the patient he was born in England, as were his parents. Although Adam understands the patient may have not intentionally tried to belittle him, he can't help but feel underestimated. 3 times in a day he was made to feel like he does not belong in the country he was born in. Although this doesn't happen every day, Adam admits it happens frequently enough for him to consider going to another country after he qualifies. These are just 3 stories in an ocean of anti-Muslim incidences. Muslim students are very familiar with questions that make them feel ostracized. from the where are you really from, to go back to your own country, to do your family force you to wear that headscarf? For Muslim medical students, these comments hurt them. It offends them. It ruins their clinical experiences. It makes them feel that they don't belong in this country. Worryingly, 84% of BAME British people believe that the UK is still very or somewhat racist. No one wants to stay in a country where they are not made to feel welcome. Data shows that doctors and medical students from ethnic minority backgrounds are up to 3 times more likely to fail an exam than white students. Ethnic minority doctors are also less likely than white doctors to be shortlisted for and appointed to consultant posts, and they are more likely to be bullied and harassed than their white consultant counterparts. This phenomenon is called differential attainment. It appears at medical school and persists after qualification. While it is important to ensure that examinations are unbiased and curriculums inclusive, the evidence points to improving the learning experience for ethnic minority students as a target for action. For example, an international review found that minority medical students experience less supportive social and less positive learning environment and were subject to discrimination and racial harassment. Now, you might be wondering how this affects you and why you should even care. The current pandemic proves to all of us how important our NHS is. Our hospitals are short-staffed. Many of our current doctors working in the NHS are doctors of foreign nationals. If 40% of our medical students are of minority backgrounds, for the NHS to function, these medical students need to stay in the country after they graduate. And for that to happen, they need to feel like they belong here, supported and appreciated. We must give our bright medical students a positive learning experience. So what can you do? In the words of Desmond Tutu, if you are neutral in a situation of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Being silent in a situation of injustice means you approve. You might feel that you are actually avoiding conflict if you stay silent, but you could be sending out the wrong signal. Sarah felt her colleagues should have stepped in to tell the patient that it was not appropriate to speak in such a manner. Speaking out against racism might encourage others around you to do the same. And we know collective voices can bring about huge changes. Today it was Sarah, Amira and Adam. Tomorrow it could be you. If it happens to them, it can also happen to you. Injustice breaks all strata of moral threshold and creates room for more injustice to occur. If we fail to speak up, we are exposing our human rights to be trampled on in the future. In our society today, we have false assumptions about people of different races and religions. Where you see false assumptions, challenge it. Challenge it so that it stops the first time it happens and it is not repeated. Perhaps a person making a racist comment is making it because they do not know any better. Perhaps you could be the reason that they learn their assumptions are wrong. There are also psychological benefits to defending others. Speaking out is an act of humanity. It is our job to look out for one another. Standing in solidarity with those who are marginalized gives them a renewed sense of hope. It will also give you a sense of fulfillment. The humanity aspect aside, challenging racism has real health benefits. If we challenge racism, it is likely to occur less frequently. Less racist comments means a better learning experience for our medical students from minority backgrounds, better learning experience, and feeling more accepted in this country means we produce more skilled doctors who feel like they belong and view this country as their own. This means more doctors in the NHS and better quality of care for patients, and this means better health outcomes. If our system is set up so our minority group medical students win, you as a patient will receive better healthcare. It is in everyone's interest that these Muslim medical students are learning in an environment where they can reach their full potential. We are often witness to injustice that other people face, and most of the time we remain passive as we think it does not affect us. In a world plagued by injustice, to remain silent means to choke the goodness within yourself. So I would like to leave you with this. Speak out educate, and improve the nation's health. When racism is no longer a block to a patient taking a doctor's advice, no longer a reason for qualified doctors to leave the country, we all benefit. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dara, for such an inspirational talk. I feel like it really truly leaves the audience members with such an inspiring message that in a world plagued by injustice, to remain silent chokes the goodness within yourself. Definitely a message that I will be taking away from that. Now, throughout the event, we're going to be mixing it up a little bit and competing in small social media games. So the very first one I'd like to introduce is the TED Talk Scavenger Hunt. So I invite all members to take part because there are prizes to be won. You have to go and find an object that matches all 3 colours of the TED Talk. So to remind you all, that's red, black and white, and we want one object. It's very important that you direct messages on Instagram, which you can find the handle down below. And don't worry if you want to relax and take your time with the event, because the prize will be announced tomorrow and the game will be taking part throughout the event and the rest of the day. So I'd like all members to join me on the scavenger hunt while we move to our next location. Now, as all the social media games are currently taking part on our platforms, I'd like to introduce all the audience members to Kemptown. Kemptown is a part of the city that the Brightonian community really hold dear, as it's become a part that we can celebrate all LGBTQ+ identities, especially as it is currently the home of the Pride Village when Pride Festival is going and taking part. Now, the one way that we can build a strong community and improve and celebrate all identities is through active listening. Only by listening can we truly learn and experience from others, and in turn that can shape our actions. And it's definitely a strong idea and a strong message, and it's definitely one that's worth spreading, which is truly the message behind our next speaker, Guilherme Klein. Now, Guilherme Klein is a founder of his own inclusive mentoring program in Brazil and supports the LGBTQ community in their development. So I'd like you all to sit back and listen to what he has to say.
A few weeks ago, I was getting ready for work and I had the TV on in the morning. On that specific day, there was a roundtable on a TV show discussing racism. One of the guests was Dr. Sholamos Shogbamim, a Black woman who happens to be a lawyer, book author, and a political activist. As the conversation went on, Dr. Shola could never finish a sentence while she was trying to express her experiences and concerns. Why? The host of the TV show kept interrupting her. At some point, tired of the situation, Dr. Shola looked at him and said these words: "Listen and you might learn something." Sadly, this is not just a TV show. This is a reflection of the society we live in. People who want to express their concerns and experiences around, especially around racism, homophobia, sexual harassment, and mental and health well-being, they just cannot get their thoughts across because people are not properly listening to them. So, what I want to share with you today is how I had an idea for an inclusive mentoring program, and by sharing the learnings from it, I will invite you to learn a little bit more how listening can be the first step to create a more inclusive world. And the good thing about this idea is that you can start today. Some of you may be thinking, do we really need to change things around? Or in my groups, my teams, diversity is not a problem, inclusion is not an issue. Well, let's listen to the data. A study from Stonewall says that 35% of LGBTQ+ have hidden or disguised their sexual orientation at work because they were afraid of prejudice and bias. 1 out of 5 said that they already have been the target of negative comments or misconduct coming from work colleagues. And 20% of them said they were afraid to disclose their sexual orientation or gender identity on an interview because they were afraid they might not get the job. I know that sometimes this could be still too far from home. You might be thinking that I do not know anyone who went through that. So let me put a face on these statistics. I see bias and prejudice happening at workplaces all the time. While some of my colleagues' main concerns and worries are how to prepare better numbers for a meeting or what's going to be their next step of career, I see myself having much more basic concerns. Can I be myself in this workplace? Can I share my sexual orientation with my work colleagues without putting myself out for prejudice and bias and be in the face of the jokes? Can people listen to me and understand that I have different needs and concerns? So yes, being who you are, it still deprives you from opportunities, and we all have a role to play to change that. The way I tried to change some of these issues was through creating an inclusive mentoring program. The idea came alive with the partnership of TEDxUniversity, one of the largest diversity and inclusion consultancy in Brazil. Our purpose was to connect business leaders with LGBTQ+ talents in conversations where they could talk about professional and personal development. We shared with the mentors a full handbook of activities they could do, videos they could watch, and readings they could have to better be prepared for these conversations. But there is one single tool that I believe to be the most effective one and the most simplistic one as well. Listening. Active listen to the person you're talking to. Listen to them and to the story they're telling you without thinking on what you're going to say, what you're going to ask, or even without thinking what you would have done if you were in their situations. Listen to their stories with the intent to understand where they're coming from, what the problems it is, and what they were facing. Listen with the intent to connect with them. Listen to them and to their stories, and that will help you to become more inclusive. How? Well, first of all, if you're listening to someone else's story, properly listening to them, you can truly exercise empathy. You can understand what it feels to be in their shoes, what their experiences look like, and how they feel, and what's their vision of the world. You can understand how hard, for example, is to share about your sexual orientation or to openly discuss about racism. Or you can understand why a joke is so hurtful and not funny at all. Another thing you can learn by listening is how to break your bias. When you talk to someone you understand and you pay attention to their stories, you're going to start putting a face to the statistics I shared before, for example. And you're going to understand how you may be the one or one of the people creating those barriers for other people. I know that some of our bias might be unconscious, but as we talk to others, we can start to understand even how our unconscious bias are playing a role and how to create these barriers and how we can start breaking them down. Another thing you can learn by listening is how to build trust and how important it is to have trust to have deep and meaningful conversations. One of the simplest ways to get to the root causes of someone else's problems is making sure that they fully share with you what's going on. And as you properly listen to them and you show that you're interested in their stories, they're going to bond with you and share what it feels like to be on their shoes. So you build trust with them. As you go through exercising your empathy, starting to understand your bias and building trust with the people you're talking to, you might be thinking, what can I do with this information that I've learned? The first thing we have to do is to become a better ally, become a proper change agent. We can start taking these learnings that we're having from these conversations and start acting upon it. One simple example is we can start when someone says a negative comment or a joke, we can start interfering and telling them that this is not funny and explaining to them what it feels to be on the other side of the joke. We can also start acting on bigger scopes, such as looking at the policies that we have around, even if it's workplace, on private spheres, or on the public spheres, and how we can help to change those policies so they become more inclusive. Another thing we can do as we listen to people and we learn from them is to break the mini-me effects around us. The mini-me effect is, according to a Forbes publication, a syndrome where people tend to surround themselves with others that are very similar to them. Usually can start with the same degree, college background, same hobbies, and most of the times ends with surrounding people that have the same gender, same sexual orientation, and race and ethnicity as you. So as you start breaking those mini-me effects, you can start giving people opportunities that they wouldn't have before. And you're going to start seeing another important element, which is the value of diversity. As you start surrounding yourself with people who have different ideas and backgrounds in yourself, you're going to see different points of views of the world. You're going to learn simplistic things such as maybe new playlists, new movies, new authors, but you're also going to understand how much more creative we can be. For example, if we're trying to find a solution to a problem, because everyone will tip in with different perspectives. As we listen to these learnings and what we can learn by listening, you might be wondering, what have I learned as I went through the inclusive mentoring program? So I can honestly share with you that I thought I already knew a lot about diversity, inclusion, and bias. But as I was paired with a young gay black man, I learned a whole new story. And that story taught me what it means to be gay and black and its intersectionality in a whole nother level. So here are some of the learnings I had from this conversation. Right at the beginning of our connections, my mentee shared with me that he always had to fight harder on his workplace. He always had to work 2-3 times harder to prove himself. And one of the examples was when they were setting an employee resource group about racism, to discuss racism. And him, a black man, was cut off this conversation. He wanted to actively participate, but people kind of just disinvited him or not invited him at all. So this taught me that we need to properly look around to people when we're trying to discuss something. And if they're showing interest, we have to invite them. And if they're not showing interest, we have to make sure that we create the right environment so they can feel part and they can say, yes, I want to participate. Another thing that he shared with me is that he never liked the way he looked. He never liked his hair, he never liked his nose. So he always wore his hair very short, and there was a time in his life that he even wore clippers on his nose to make it thinner. Why? He wanted to look like the models we see on TV, the people we see in Hollywood. So that taught me an important lesson on how representation matters, and that myself as a communicator, I have a role to play on breaking these beauty stereotypes and creating a world where people can see themselves reflected in any kind of media. Another thing that he taught me is that because he went through so much racism and homophobia in his life, he never learned to love himself. He never learned to be proud of his story. He is such a young, talented, and great professional, but he never could see that himself. So he taught me that we need to listen to people, listen to their stories, and help them see their potential, even when they can't. And that's why I go back to the beginning of the conversation and to the talk show. We all need to listen. We all need to learn. And I really emphasize all, because we can all be in a mentoring position. You can be a mentor at workplace as you have a position of team leader or manager. You can be a mentor as you're explaining to someone what can be their career choices or career options. You can be a mentor while discussing with your kids about racism or Asian hate. You can be a mentor as you're teaching your grandparents what it means to be transgender. Being a mentor means being in a position that you can talk to someone, inspire, motivate, and guide, or just simply listen to them and support in the moment where they need. So again, listening can teach us important lessons on how we can exercise empathy, break our bias, and build trust with people. It can show us how to be better allies, proper change agents, how we can break the mini-me effects around us and start valuing diversity. And through this acquired knowledge, we can all change the world. And I know, when I say change the world, it might sound so monumental, so utopic. But if we listen to someone else's story and we help that person to change their world, we are already creating true, meaningful inclusion. So what I will ask you today is, can you listen to someone else's story and help them to start changing their world? Can you do that today? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guilherme. Now, up next, I'd like to introduce the Sussex Dance Society, who've created such a special performance for us today. And without much further ado, the Dance Society. Thank you so much to the Sussex Dance Society. And if you are enjoying this event, please share your support in liking and subscribing. You can click the button down below. Okay, so on with the tour, and I'd like to bring you to a very iconic part of the Brighton scenery. So currently we are standing near the Brighton Pier, which is actually dubbed the Palace Pier. And the Palace Pier is one of the most iconic structures in Brighton, and was actually erected due to the collapse of the Royal Suspension Chain Pier in 1899. It's become such a true structure of rebuilding from the rubble and is very important within our next talk. So I'd like to introduce you to the Palace Pier. Our next speaker shares a tale of surviving trauma and rebuilding ourselves. Her talk is very deep, inspiring and personal, and it explores the challenges human rights professionals have to overcome and face in their day-to-day work. It's how to navigate those pressures to create a healthy work-life basis. And predominantly in a virtual world nowadays, it's more crucial than ever to ensure that those boundaries are protected and very clear. With over 24 years of experience working in the human rights sector, our next speaker, Vicky Praise, shares with us how difficult and oftenly emotionally charged the nature of her work actually is. It's only by adopting our own version of proper selfishness that we can truly survive in that type of career. So I'd like you all to sit back and relax and learn how Vicky Praise shows us the hardships that human rights professionals face.
I am a human rights lawyer. I care passionately about what I do. I've been incredibly lucky. My 25-year-long career has taken me to Russia, Armenia, Canada, the Ukraine, with the UN, the Council of Europe, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and Penal Reform International. I knew from my early days as a volunteer at a prison creche while studying law at university that a career in human rights and of service was where my heart lay. This experience had a profound impact upon me. In fact, the concept of dignity behind bars remains to this day a constant theme in my own human rights practice. The shiny corporate world of the suited and booted lay no allure for me. In terms of my career plan, I knew the what, but had to figure out the how. To be a change maker, I studied law, got a master's degree in human rights and civil liberties, and became a lawyer. As I look back, a few moments come to mind, like the time I was in Gračanica, a Serb enclave in Kosovo, standing among bombed out homes, pockmarked and riddled by Albanian snipers. As a minority rights officer with the UN, I was there to celebrate a wine harvest with the local community. I spoke to one of the residents about his life there. He told me that he had no electricity, that his freedom of movement was restricted, and that he had to be escorted to and from work by the UN. The Serb enclave was guarded by the UN, a constant reminder that the residents and the community were at risk and that a fragile peace hung heavy in the air. Like the time a dual British-Algerian national returned to Algeria and was detained on political grounds and died whilst on hunger strike under my watch as a human rights advisor to the Foreign Office. This case remains etched in my mind. Was there more I could or should have done to save his life? Like the time I represented asylum seekers before the immigration courts here in London for a large national charity, as their advocate, a heavy burden lay on my shoulders to secure my client's refugee status. For many, it was a matter of life or death. You see, this work lingers. It takes its toll. It comes at a cost, no matter how much you care about this work. Today, I want to tell you why you need to be properly selfish to be a great human rights activist. I first heard about the concept of proper selfishness when I was at the Foreign Office in a talk given by the now British High Commissioner to New Zealand, Laura Clark. Laura's request to not neglect proper selfishness resonated with me. I started to think, when is it okay to be selfish? When is it okay to say, we can't be everything to everyone? When is it okay to say, I can't save everyone? It is not an easy conversation to have with yourself. This work is not for everyone. It takes stamina and strength, both physical and mental. This work is deeply painful and confronting. We bear witness to harrowing testimonies we'd rather not hear. We bear witness to stories of torture, sexual violence, female genital mutilation. I have heard them all. We amplify the cracked and broken voices and offer to narrate for them. To those of us involved with the good fight, know that we too are at risk. I have seen my peers working well into the small hours and at the weekends to stop the imminent deportation of a vulnerable asylum seeker. You see, we will do whatever it takes. Self-sacrifice and heroism are badges of honor in our sector, and to many simply go with the territory. Yet we work in some of the most hostile and difficult locations around the world, and we do not always work in the most supportive and giving of environments. As human rights professionals, we are at risk of succumbing to vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and at its extremities, burnout, given the emotional labor that we invest in our work, not least human rights lawyers. But there is a growing body of academic evidence documenting these issues among my peers. The conversation has started. Like research undertaken by the Resilience Project in 2015, which showed that among 346 human rights advocates, some 19.4% met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. These figures speak for themselves. As human rights professionals, we are regularly exposed to the trauma of others, and we are deeply affected by this trauma. We are like sponges. We listen and absorb. We put ourselves in the survivor's shoes. I know all too well. The symptoms of vicarious trauma are physical, panic attacks, nightmares, and intrusive thoughts, but also psychological, loss of concentration, negative thinking, emotional numbing. If left unchecked, these can impact our work, our physical and mental health. Or we may find that we simply care less. I felt close to those moments when I could give no more to my clients. The concept of compassion fatigue finds its roots in the healthcare sector and was coined by Carla Joynson when she noticed that nurses had simply lost their ability to nurture. We are effectively running on empty. The symptoms of compassion fatigue may manifest themselves in different ways: an inability to empathize with another's suffering, feelings of isolation, being physically tired, and suffering from concentration difficulties. Sadly, the pains of passion become our own internal pain and something too difficult to bear. In some cases, it may become debilitating and we simply burn out. Burnout is of a different order entirely and is not to be mistaken with compassion fatigue. The World Health Organization classifies it as a syndrome that is linked to chronic workplace stress. We may start to feel negative or cynical about our job. We may start to be less effective and productive. In terms of physical ailments, we may be exhausted, anxious, and of low mood. But it need not be this way. We need to take good care of ourselves if we are to do our job well. I am not here to espouse values of self-care. It is firmly rooted in our psyche and needs no further embellishment from me. At its heart, proper selfishness is an invitation. It is an invitation to look beyond classic self-interest, to take a step back, to restore and replenish, so that you can be a better asset to the world and use that selfishness for the greater good. It is not saying not to care or to abandon your ideals. How do we practice proper selfishness? I offer no quick fixes or magic potions. You will go on your own personal journey to find what works for you. For me, my personal selfishness lies in building networks with friends and family, keeping body, heart, and soul in check, seeking help when you need it. For me, talking to a counsellor at the Foreign Office was my saving grace, and going to feed squirrels in the park, and I am not a big animal lover. When we practice proper selfishness, it's a win-win. We have passion, we have energy, we are of use. And to those we help, they get the best of us. This sector has seen too many embattled soldiers leave and walk away. This work has not broken me, but I got close. Nor am I, in the words of Carl Jung, a wounded healer. I remain optimistic and guided by my North Star that we can and do make a difference to those we help. Would I or could I do another line of work? I think about this deeply when I am mentally exhausted or physically drained by my work. I think the answer has to be a resounding no. The desire to help is too big to ignore. To those looking to forge a career in human rights, I urge you to do so, but in a safe and responsible way. Safe spaces are opening up to talk about the impact of this work and to find support. I urge you to find them. But proper selfishness offers riches to us all, not just human rights lawyers. And in a time of everyday activism, it is of particular resonance. I think about my visit to Dajigi Women's Prison in Japan in 2016 to visit a woman detained on drugs-related charges. I met her in a small, windowless visiting room. She was frail, in a wheelchair and suffering from early onset dementia. As her human rights advisor, I was there to ensure that her human rights were being respected. The privations and challenges of life in a Japanese prison cannot be underestimated. I lobbied the Japanese authorities to ensure that she received adequate health care and could attend Japanese language classes. Her life was a bit better for my intervention, but I could not have done so had I not practiced my own proper selfishness. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I think we can all agree to use the concept of proper selfishness in our day-to-day lives to establish clear boundaries. Now, with that talk, it brings us to the end of the first session of our event. So I would like to welcome everyone in the audience to please take a break. Currently, alongside this event, we are running a wellbeing wall, and I'd invite everyone to please go check it out, comment, and see, what you'd like to post on it. Also, if you are enjoying this event, please like and subscribe and press the button down below. And go ahead, chill out, take a break, go and get a cup of tea, use the bathroom, or just relax and listen to the music. And don't forget that the next session will start at the end of the countdown. I'll see you then. Hello and welcome back to TEDxUniversity of Sussex. We're going to start the next session on a high. I'd like to introduce you to the next stop on our tour, which is the I360. Now the I360 provides riders with panoramic views of Brighton, the South Downs and the English Channel. However, without advancements in technology and architecture, such amazing structures like this would not be possible today. Coincidentally, that's the formula and the basis that our next talker will be discussing. Anya Belova has successfully founded 2 anti-bullying startups, and her talk is inspired from the fact that during this global pandemic, there has been an increased rise in loneliness and in cyberbullying. She investigates and is also so passionate about how technological advancements can be used to combat such pressuring issues and how it calls for such a kinder and better future for us all to enjoy. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Anya.
When was the last time you felt lonely? If you say never, great. I hope you do. But you might say last year, or last week, or today, or maybe even right now. If that's you, you're in the majority. Since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, loneliness has gone up by 65%. That's quite a high number, considering it was a problem before we were all forced to isolate from friends, family members, and coworkers, and spend a significant amount of daily time glued to our screens. A couple of years ago, researchers found that 3 in 5 adults in the United States feel lonely. And in the United Kingdom, every 1 out of 8 adults do not have close friends, and almost 1 out of 5 UK adults feel lonely all of the time. Loneliness has pretty much been a hidden global pandemic before the real pandemic happened, and it may be contributing to serious problems in the digital domain. For a lot of children and youth, feeling attacked, judged, embarrassed, or excluded online is a frequent experience. As our time spent on electronic devices has gone up, so have cyberbullying rates. Throughout the past year, instances of cyberbullying across various social platforms have been on the rise, as has the number of suicidal ideas and attempts among children and teenagers. Even prior to our increased screen time, almost 1/5 of teenagers admitted to having engaged in bullying others online. Cyberbullying is dangerous and terrifying, leading victims to depression, drug abuse, and self-harm. And one of the reasons it may be happening is loneliness. The feeling of loneliness can lead to anger and hostility, which are associated with aggressive behaviors such as bullying. Loneliness creates a cognitive dissonance between the amount of social activity and communication someone wants to have and the amount they actually have, leading the person to feel insecure and hateful. It may even cause them to push others away in order to feel better about their loneliness, like they didn't even need anyone in the first place. For instance, a study from York University revealed that men who are lonely behave more aggressively towards women and feel a greater sense of hostility. And another study from the University of Chicago also demonstrated that loneliness increases stress and anger among university students. And when people are angry, they can become bullies. Let's be honest, it's already common for teenagers to struggle with understanding how to process their thoughts, emotions, and experiences, and respond to others in a healthy way. But when you add loneliness on top of that, it can lead a young person down a really bad path. So, what can we do about it? In many ways, it may seem that technology is the culprit. The more we aim to use it, the worse our social and psychological situation may get. After all, for a bully, the digital realm provides a sense of anonymity and security, the perfect platform for the release of negative feelings. But what if we are looking at it the wrong way? Perhaps as our technological capabilities increase, we can leverage them to combat loneliness and cyberbullying and empower members of society. For instance, let's take the virtual reality. If you've seen people wearing funky goggles reminiscent of Cyclops from the X-Men, then you know what I'm talking about. It's a tool that can transport you to a different location, like space, or allow you to temporarily be Batman if you're into that. It can also help surgeons practice procedures and train corporate employees in industries such as retail. Virtual reality can be viewed as a fun source of entertainment or as a useful tool for skill training, but it also carries immense possibilities to improve people's mental health. MIT research conducted with older adults who experienced loneliness and a lack of social engagement showed that the use of virtual reality can improve their psychological well-being. The individuals who were exposed to travel and relaxation-related content through virtual reality had more positive emotions and less feelings of social isolation and depression. Conversely, people who viewed similar content on TV did not experience the same positive effects because TV watching is a more passive activity. Scientists have also seen VR technology be effective in reducing anxiety and depression in older adults with cognitive impairments, producing a heightened sense of happiness, relaxation, and adventure, and reduced worry and stress. With a reduction in loneliness and a boost in positive feelings, people may exhibit less aggression, which could serve to alleviate cyberbullying. And here's something interesting. Playing a virtual reality game in which you get to be a superhero can actually make you behave more like one in real life. That's right. A Stanford study in which participants got to experience Superman-like abilities and help others in a VR game resulted in them becoming more helpful and pro-social beyond the game, in the real world. This type of effect was demonstrated across a number of age ranges and countries, including the United States, Japan, and Singapore. What if something similar could be done to train people to be kinder online, to be cyber superheroes? And what if, by engaging in immersive VR experiences, we can feel more connected to the world around us, happier, less lonely? A lot of adults in the audience might be thinking, whoa, my child already spends way too much time in front of the screen. Let me reassure you, digital screen time may not be as harmful to your child in and of itself as you may expect. Oxford researchers discovered that children who spend 1 to 2 hours daily using digital devices exhibit better socio-emotional well-being than children who do not use technology. Of course, more than 5 hours of screen time can get problematic, but moderate doses can be healthy. Either way, in the near future, it is important to figure out ways to make virtual reality more accessible and available so that we can use it to promote the psychological well-being of both children and adults. Another area worth mentioning is robotics. According to a large body of reputable research, different robots have been shown to be effective against loneliness. In fact, robotic dogs have a similar effect of reducing loneliness as real dogs, which is pretty curious. The presence of the pet robot can produce a sense of comfort and companionship, and interactions with a robot, which include petting and cuddling, lead to mood improvement and increased happiness. For individuals who cannot own real pets due to allergies or travel constraints, or who may have difficulties taking care of the pets, robotic ones may be the best option. And the positive results aren't just limited to robotic dogs. Robotic seals and even humanoid robots that kind of look like a thinner version of Baymax from Disney's Big Hero 6 are also helpful. Similarly to our previous discussion on virtual reality, studies conducted in elderly homes in the United Kingdom and Japan found that interactions with talking robots boosted mental health and decreased loneliness. That's pretty great to think about. People can form strong emotional bonds with robotic animals and feel a high level of attachment to them. Some robotic animals can recognize and interpret their surrounding environments and learn to behave in ways that are most comforting and beneficial for the user. Certain robots are more advanced than others, but the theme of improved user well-being is present across different robot types. Although robots, of course, cannot completely replace human interaction, they can serve as a psychological support system when individuals feel lonely or distressed. It is necessary to find ways to increase the accessibility of robotics within our population and extend the possibilities of using robotic pets to people of different ages and incomes. Perhaps in the future, we can also utilize artificial intelligence resources to recognize degrees of loneliness in individuals and provide customized solutions. A recent UC San Diego study used artificial intelligence and natural language processing to investigate how speech patterns may reveal loneliness. Software such as this can be used to identify individuals who are feeling loneliness to a dangerous degree and provide them with specific ways to improve their psychological well-being. Sometimes people may not realize the extent of their emotions or conditions, so they could use AI tools to understand whether they need additional support, and if so, what kind of support would work best for them. As we see technological innovation happening around us, it is crucial to recognize how we can use it to improve the well-being of our society, the well-being of each other. When we feel lonely, unsupported, it can lead us to turn against each other, to be angry and hostile, to become cyberbullies. We must look at virtual reality, robotics, artificial intelligence, these areas that hold so much potential and possibility, and see that we can utilize them to create a better post-pandemic world. A world with less loneliness, with less cyberbullying, a kinder future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, for a truly inspirational speech. I think nowadays, because technology has become such an important aspect in our lives, from contacting friends, families, from working remotely, from even remote learning, I feel like the advancements in technology have really made all of this possible. Therefore, it's truly reassuring to know that there are creative minds such as Anya who are working to drive this industry to great heights. Now, next up, we have a little social media game to play. And living in a virtual world and all being together yet apart, everyone will be experiencing this event very differently. So I'd like to invite all audience members to please share their current view of what they see in this event. In order to do this, all you simply need to do is post a photo of your conference setup on social media and use the hashtag down below to be featured. This is my view. Welcome to the lanes. Originally farm trading sites, the North Lanes are now home to many various spaces providing creativity and reflect different identities that flow through Brighton. Our next speaker is currently tackling the representation of trans people on TV and how that contributes to the effects that it can have on the pride of their own identity. In an age where media and film acts as titans within our society, Diana Dragani's talk addresses a highly important issue surrounding the representation of trans people on screen. Representation is a key element to show the world who trans people are, especially for those who've never met or interacted with one. Through strong analysis and critical commentary, she argues why more stories need to be told by those who live the truths daily because of the immense impacts these representations have on both sides of the screen. Take it away, Diana.
As a little closeted trans girl, I turned on the TV to get answers as to why I felt different. And the first memory I have of trans women were those of psychopaths, people who make you vomit, and that of rejected and abused sex workers. 3 memories come to mind. The movie Silence of the Lambs, where a psychotic man kills women because he wants to become them. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, where a trans woman reveals her genitalia only to be laughed at. And lastly, an Italian soap opera where a man vomits when he realizes he was going to be intimate with a trans woman. If I think about a time during my childhood when the word trans had a positive connotation, I would be here thinking forever. Never have I thought of this word, let alone the people this word describes, as something normal, in contrast to the way I felt growing up. Abnormal. I felt in no way I could disclose who I was to anyone because I didn't want to end up on the street, because that was what I thought it would mean, and still does for many of us. It took me 28 years of lived life and experiences to take the courage to come out. The main problem as to why it took me so long is that the word trans was always whispered or never spoken but hinted at. as a taboo or a disease you don't speak of. Because it all comes down to the disinformation, stereotypes, and made up beliefs caused by the lack of positive and authentic representation of trans identities in media. Seeing positive trans role models on screen could have allowed me to love myself as a young girl. Authentic portrayals are what make stereotypes disappear. Watching trans people and trans kids be who they truly are on screen can actually save lives. In a moment, I'm going to tell you how seeing positive trans representation helped me be true to myself. But first, let's see how trans representation has changed on TV in recent years and how much change is still needed on the big screen. Growing up, I saw actors wearing trans being praised for their roles as if being trans is a character to be played. But once the camera stopped rolling, you could put your wig and costume back in the closet where they belong and live your unbothered, privileged life as a non-trans person, a cisgender person. I saw trans sex workers being killed over and over again on shows like CSI, NCIS, and the likes. I saw trans people dying because of their transition. In Dr. House and Grey's Anatomy, trans bodies were rejecting hormones or surgeries. I saw and kept watching trans stories written by cisgender people to amuse cisgender audiences and their expectation of what it means to be trans in their eyes. A lesser human being that doesn't deserve to be told on screen in its true form. We don't have to go that far back in time to see this happening. Cinema is still not changing. GLAAD, the American Media Monitoring Organization that works against discrimination of LGBTQ+ people, reports that there were 0 films with transgender characters from the major studios in 2019. The last year we have data for. In March this year, in the movie Secret Society All We Have Is Us, there were 2 trans black women, both played by cis actresses, packed with transphobic jokes that made cis audiences laugh. Even when gender non-conforming characters are included in fictional audiovisual texts, they are indeed still often poorly written, falling into offensive tropes and stereotypes about transgender people, GLAAD confirms. But thankfully, things are changing on TV. In the last decade, there has been an increase of authentic and positive portrayals of trans folks in television, thanks mostly to 2 tipping points. Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black, and more recently the show Pose on Netflix. Having LGBTQ+ representation that doesn't revolve around trauma, tragedy, objectification, abuse, and death is a dream and privilege that the trans and gender non-conforming community is slowly starting to pursue as something that can actually happen. Lately, many shows have switched their approach to trans identities, finally treating this category of people as actual human beings. As actual human beings that just are more than their genitals or who they like to have sex with. Trans folks began to have regular lives, at times fun ones too, to have different jobs than what one might have expected, to have monogamous healthy relationships, to have friends and family that love them unconditionally, and to be finally seen, written, and performed by trans people as well. Trans and non-binary folks can see themselves portrayed in a way that makes us feel appreciated and understood for the very first time outside the tropes of the past. The reason these changes are happening is also because of a few directors reevaluating what they did. I call this phenomenon the Ryan Murphy effect. Since the creator of Nip and Tuck and Glee, Ryan Murphy, used to portray trans characters, his casting, though, was shallow and his writing was a stereotypical exploitation of characters' gender and sexualities. However, he is now one of the most influential people in trans representation, with later seasons of Glee, shows like 911 Lone Star, and of course Pose. My hope is that more directors follow Ryan Murphy. It's actually already happening in shows like Grey's Anatomy, The Good Doctor, and many others. I wish this change had happened sooner. Positive trans representation could have helped me see myself as beautiful and helped me feel as proud as I am today of being a trans woman. Representation is a key element to show the world who trans people are, especially for those who have never met or interacted with one. These are the stories I needed to watch when I was little. These are the stories I wish my family would have watched decades ago. These are the stories that could make a difference to little trans children and their families today. Stories about hopes and dreams that things can change and are eventually changing. I'm hopeful because I see representation on screen changing, but the pace of it is still slow. How can we speed it up? Well, you and me both have agency in this change. There are many things we as audiences or the audience can do to be part of the solution and not the problem. Boycott shows and movies, write emails to networks, or simply tweet about it. Make our voices heard, even if you're not trans. You can be an ally and show that these stories are not just for us trans people, that you cis people want to see them too. And if you work in the industry, allow trans folks to be the writers and the performers of our own stories. I am Diana, I am a trans woman, and I'm that little closeted trans girl that turns on the TV, but now she's out and proud. Proud to be who I really am. Proud to live life as my true self. Proud to exist in a world that keeps discriminating people like me. Another reasons why it's time we take up spaces that have always been denied to us. We are more than our transition. We're human beings with feelings, hopes, goals. We're friends and enemies. We're main and supporting characters. We're good and evil. We're men, women, and everything in between and beyond. We're trans. We're people.
Thank you, Dee. I'm sure that the trans community watching this will not only agree with you, but actually feel represented by you. To see you giving such an inspirational TED Talk is a big step towards the goal you have established. Now, up next is a guest appearance from our a cappella society, so without much further ado, please give it up for our singing stars.
Isolation, COVID nation, there's a sense of doom. In my room, another Amazon delivery, thank you. In my room, and space in my room, thank you to the key workers. See the carers and mask wearers work despite their gloom. In my room, in my room, where you're not in my room. Oh, now we bless the dark and I'm alone, but I won't be afraid. In my room, quiz on Zoom. In my room, work on Zoom. Playground room, uni on Zoom. Everything on Zoom. But I won't be afraid. In my room.
Thank you to the A Cappella Society. I believe that your piece perfectly matches our Together Apart theme. Having so many different people come together on screen while apart really highlights the struggles that everyone's had to face during this past pandemic. Following from the musical theme, we're now at the Brighton Bandstand, which has been standing since the Victorian time and has been the host to many, many different musical performances. I'd like to start introducing our next talker, who is a PhD researcher at the University of Sussex. Now, Marusha Levstek is going to talk about group music marking as a lifeline for many, many different people during the pandemic, especially young people. Her talk's inspired by her aspirations and her goals in order to better understand how we can shape the future of virtual creative spaces. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Marusha.
Art can inspire, art can connect, and art can empower. Many of us derive pleasure from art, but we often don't realise its true power. This has become especially apparent during the pandemic, when music has been a lifeline for many, with stories of neighbours standing on their balconies and doorsteps, singing, "We will meet again." Music has been there in many historically dark as well as evolutionary moments. And many genres have developed that way, such as blues having its origins in the history of enslavement in America, or punk as an outcry of youth disappointed in the lack of opportunities for the disadvantaged. Do you remember Punk Prayer in Moscow, when a group of feminists performed in a cathedral, singing to Virgin Mary to assert herself as a feminist icon and save the nation from Putin? Music has a true power to challenge and give voice to those silenced. And today I'm here to tell you about the psychology of art as empowerment and why it shouldn't be a privilege. Did you know that in the UK, marginalised young people are less likely to engage with music and other art subjects at school and outside school? And that's a big percentage of the whole of the UK population, with those young people with special educational needs or disabilities representing around 15%, and those receiving free school meals representing around 16% of the whole of the UK's children population. And arts engagement in general has declined in the UK. Since 2010, number of creative subjects at school has decreased for around 40%, and around 30% for music specifically. At this rate, some researchers suggest that there will be no final year music students by the year of 2033. And even those that had the privilege to engage with the art were unable to during the pandemic, when many of those activities were moved online. This demonstrates how so many of the young people in the UK don't have access to explore their creativity and engage with the arts. I have spent the last 3 years researching different music projects, trying to understand what they bring to young people's lives. I have worked with projects ranging from inclusive music ensembles for young people with special needs or disabilities, to music production spaces put in economically deprived areas. I have interviewed parents, young people, staff members, analysed session notes, used questionnaires and surveys, and observed many sessions, especially when they were moved online. I have observed how music empowers individuals and their communities and mapped those experiences in a model. This model consists of 2 parts. The first, representing how individuals grow, and the second representing the power of the communities around them. On the individual level, in sessions that allow for freedom and voluntary engagements, young people express and explore themselves through creativity and engagement with music. This allows them to become more aware of their psychological and emotional experiences and become much better at understanding and regulating them. This has been especially important for those struggling with mental health difficulties, and creative freedom has been particularly valuable for those with physical disabilities, whose autonomy is often taken away from them in everyday lives. The social contact has also been very important, with staff members having the power to challenge the way young people see themselves through validation and positive feedback. And so did their peers. In fact, every single group that I have spoken to was telling me about the importance of the community that is being created around making music together. And again, this is being especially important for those marginalised. With those young people who have negative views of themselves, often due to the stigma of their marginalisation, they get to see themselves in a new way because they get to see themselves as musicians and as able. And those struggling socially get to practice their social skills in an environment where they can feel accepted through music making and gain social skills that they can then take somewhere else and practice them and connect to others. In fact, making music together as a way of bonding has been highlighted in a lot of cases, but especially during the pandemic when this wasn't possible. Apart from greater social understanding, growing in confidence and social ability, some research also suggests that engagement with music has a positive impact on young people's academic achievement. And I have also observed this in my own research. There seems to be the ability of music to bridge the gap between those marginalised and those privileged in terms of graduating from high school, going to universities, and even stuff like voting and volunteering. This demonstrates the true power of art to challenge systemic inequalities in our societies, while access to it is actually one of them, especially for those with special educational needs, disabilities, or those eligible for free school meals. And when we help the marginalised, we build better societies. So if you feel encouraged to help discover creativity and art to those unable, but also to those who could all benefit from it immensely, I encourage you to collect your local art community projects and help in any way you can, such as donating money, donating all instruments, volunteering your time if you play an instrument, or lobbying your local representatives for more funding for such projects. I believe that art inspires our daily lives and connects us in difficult times. We saw that art gives voices to those unheard and empowerment to those marginalised. So let's make it available to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Marusha. Music truly has the power to get us through some rough times, and there's so much to learn from the extensive research, such as Marusha's, that we can take and learn about ourselves. Now with that, it's the end of the second session of this event, and I welcome everyone to take a break. Please remember to feel free and go and check out our wellbeing wall. The link will be on the countdown screen down below. If you're enjoying the event, remember to hit like and subscribe, also found down below, and check out all of our social media platforms, all of which you can find out below. So please go and take a break, listen to some music, have some food, and I'll see you at the end of the countdown. welcome back to TEDx University of Sussex. And I'd like to begin the third section of this event at Preston Park. Preston Park is one of the greatest green spaces found in Brighton, and it's become a place where the Sussex community can really come to recharge their mental health. Speaking of mental health, our next speaker, Julia Briggs, is a passionate mental health advocate. She's here to deliver new ideas surrounding the narrow use of language within mental health. Within her talk, she proposes more accessible ways to talk about our lived experiences. The message is clear. The simple idea of treating mental health with respect and dignity instead of seeing it as a burden could become an easy reality with advancements in the accessibility of language and speak. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Julia.
I'm talking to a new acquaintance about my time at university or college. We've chatted for a while and I think I've sussed the person out pretty well. So I feel almost confident when I say I took a year out at college because I was in a mental health hospital. I can see the person's eyes start to widen. Yes, I continue, a little more hurriedly, wishing I'd not started this topic. And at uni I had to suspend my course twice because of being in hospital again. I still finished it though. The course, I mean, not the hospital. The poor joke does little to bring back the light-hearted talk we've been having prior to me admitting I have a mental health condition. The person seems very lost as to what to say, and that pretty much ends our blossoming friendship. Now, some of you may have seen Oprah Winfrey's interview with Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. When Meghan starts to speak openly about her mental health and how she's feeling, Oprah, who was a very experienced interviewer, was clearly taken aback. Oprah said, "Wow." She pauses. "I don't want to be alive anymore. That's, And here she pauses again, quite noticeably. Meghan interjects, helping to move the conversation on, and later Oprah asks some really good, non-judgmental questions. She says, "So, were you thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts?" I'm mentioning Oprah's interview because it's a real-world, off-the-cuff example of how mental health is talked about on a daily basis. In this case, it was an interview between two very famous people, but it could just as easily have been a conversation happening in any random pub in England. So what's the issue? A lot has been done in recent years to open up conversations in mental health. Since 2014, Time to Talk Day has been a yearly event in the UK, where people are encouraged to talk about their mental health. Yet, the way we speak to each other about our experiences of mental health is deeply flawed. We need to address mental health directly in conversation. Let me explain. If someone were to say to you, "I didn't finish my course at university because I was in hospital with meningitis," would you feel awkward? Would you try to second guess your response? Would it feel strange to say, "Oh, that's awful, but I'm so glad you've recovered and you're doing well now. What did you study at uni again?" No, of course not. We know what to say when people talk to us about physical illness, and it's almost second nature to us. But mental health is different. Why is that? Is it because of the stigma surrounding mental health and the taboo nature of the topic? Yes, of course. But I would argue that it's something more than that too. It's the language you and I are using to discuss our experiences that makes it so difficult to have an ordinary conversation. The person who wants to talk about their lived experience first has to second guess what they want to say. What language should I use? I went crazy, I was psychotic, I was unstable, I had an episode. None of these are words we genuinely want to associate with ourselves or with our identities. Even more confusingly, do I tell you the whole history, some of it, or just a diagnosis on its own? What if you jump to conclusions? What if you heard something awful on the news, or saw an episode feature on EastEnders, or a documentary on Netflix? I don't want you to get a false impression of me. I don't want you to see me in the wrong light. No one wants to feel like they're different or like they're alone in their experiences. When it comes to talking to people about parts of my life, I have a choice. Do I skip over the months of time where I was in an acute mental health hospital? Or do I explain my condition, my diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder, and have it, even if I don't want it to, become the focal point of the conversation? Because when we talk about a broken arm, a sprained wrist, or a sore throat, rarely does it have the effect to make someone stop short without knowing what to say next, or have the power to derail a conversation entirely. Making the choice to share my story or keep it to myself on a regular basis makes me feel alone. It makes me feel alone because it can feel like I don't actually have a choice at all. If I stay silent, I feel disingenuous. If I say something, I just can't predict the other person's reaction. Being in a mental health hospital at 16 is not something that everyone has experience of. But just because an experience isn't shared, shouldn't make talking about it so difficult. Because at its very core, my lived experience of my mental health makes me who I am. It makes me different. And being different ought to be talked about with the same ease that we discuss other differences, and should be celebrated. I wonder how many times you've spoken to a close friend, your best mate, a family member, or a colleague, and heard from them that they have been struggling with their mental health. We're all connected by our shared experiences, and what happens to one person in our social circle, family group, or friendship network affects each of us deeply. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England. 25% of everyone you know, of the people you love, will have a mental health problem. And you're probably not going to know about it. Because when you're actually struggling yourself, whether you have schizophrenia, depression, OCD, anxiety, an eating disorder, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, or a multitude of other diagnoses, it can feel like no one else can possibly understand what it is you're facing and feeling. And when we feel alone, the daily dialogue our friends and family use comes back to haunt us. It's the language that we don't think twice about that becomes hurtful. For instance, when someone says, "Quit being so psycho," or "She looks anorexic," there's "He's so bipolar," or "That's totally mental. Oh my god, that's crazy and so insane." Mental health conditions are not adjectives, and using them as such leads to people who have these conditions feeling alone. The language we use, these words, they all have negative connotations. Throughout history, this language has managed to erode people's empathy of others. Take the example of hysteria. Once a mental health diagnosis on its own, only attributed to women, as time has gone on and science has evolved, we now know that what was once deemed hysteria was actually the result of trauma. Now, we would never think to call a woman hysterical and put her in a mental health hospital because she was showing strong emotions. Yet, that's what happened in the past, and the word hysterical remains because of this. There's a statistic that I would like to share with you. It's this. Over 1/3 of the general public believe that people with mental health issues are likely to be violent. People genuinely believe that those with mental health conditions are violent, scary, and different. Yet, in reality, people with mental health problems are 3 times more likely to be a victim of crime than the general population. People who struggle with their mental health are scared, not scary. We're scared to be alone, and sometimes we feel desperately lonely. These sorts of statistics show that we need to all speak out to subvert mental health stereotypes, or it will remain the case that 25% of people just like you and me, will be seen as different or other. By challenging the way mental health is spoken about in daily conversation, we can challenge the idea that people with mental health problems are somehow entirely different from everyone else. That's why I've come up with a simple acronym to remember if someone speaks to you about their mental health. It's RON, R-O-N. RON stands for respectful, optimistic, and non-judgmental. If it helps you to remember, think about Ron Weasley in Harry Potter, and how he was a great friend to Harry right from the off when they met on the Hogwarts Express. So those 3 words should form the basis for all our conversations about mental health. It's hard enough getting the words out sometimes, so knowing that the other person will hear the story, treat it with respect and optimism and no judgment makes all the difference. It makes the conversation easier to have. Instead of viewing mental illness as a burden that costs businesses money and time, and labelling somebody from the get-go as different or other from the norm, what an amazing achievement it would be if we strove to find ways to talk about mental health in new ways. How much more powerful would having that conversation about your mental health be if your story was met with openness and acceptance? Think RON, R-O-N, when someone speaks to you about their mental health, and you can make that conversation easier to have. Because we all have an individual story to tell. A person's mental health is unique, and just one person talking about their mental health can be powerful and make a huge difference in minimizing stigma. But imagine all of us taking a moment to notice the language we use and actively changing the way we talk about mental health. That difference we make becomes unlimited, and the very language we use can change the way we perceive ourselves, our mental health identities, and even each other. Talking is often the starting point of social change, because what we talk about becomes our collective experience. Talking unites us and it brings us together. When we shift our language, we shift our perspective. When we start to speak about our mental health in the same casual, easy way we discuss our physical health, not in veiled terms or wondering if the next thing we say will be too much or too little, that's when we can start to picture the language we use having the power to bring us together. When we understand what we can say changes people's perceptions, then our individual differences can become strengths and not weaknesses. When we sometimes feel like we are completely alone, we will know that we aren't. Because having what's known as a serious mental health condition, or any mental health condition, can make you feel alone. If someone is seen as different or other in a bad way, not a warm and fuzzy kind of way, they can feel completely alone. But if someone is seen as different and respected for that difference, celebrated for their individual identity, and appreciated for their strength and resilience, that is when our experiences when we are apart bring us together. Our shared narrative, the language that we use, becomes positive, and finally, people start to hear us.
Thank you, Juja, for such an inspirational talk and teaching us all to highlight the importance of using language in a considerate way when it has such a large impact. Now, up next, I'd like all audience members to take part in another interactive game. This one's going to be a little game of bingo, And it involves you all going to our social media, specifically our Instagram page, taking a screenshot of the Wellbeing Bingo template and putting a picture of it on your story and tagging us so we can see what you're getting up to. Now, up next on our little tour of Brighton, I'd like to invite you all to Stamner Park. Stamner Park is a part of the South Downs, which is a nature reserve, preventing the development of architectural structures and corruption of nature. Speaking of corruption, our next talker, Dr. Roxana Bratu, is going to be talking about her experience of growing up in a country with what's considered high corruption levels and has determined to pursue a career in researching this phenomenon. She hopes that one day her work will inspire change and help people revolt against structural injustices. She explores the meaning and measurement of corruption and how we can all tackle it. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Roxana Bratu.
I've studied corruption for nearly 15 years now, and if there's one thing that I've learned during all this time is that corruption is hard to define, it's hard to measure, and it's really hard to tackle. But it's easy to spot it when you see it. So basically, people are able to recognize corruption or misbehavior associated with corruption whenever they encounter it, especially when they see it in other people's behaviors. Let me give you some examples. I grew up in Romania, and I remember as a kid, my grandma used to take me with her whenever she was visiting her GP. And I remember I was always so surprised that my grandma would bring a gift with her to the GP. And I remember that clearly because usually the gift was a home-baked cake. And as a child, I would always look at it and wanted to taste it. Fast forward 20 years later, I'm having a walk in a park with one of my best friends who confided in me that she was so happy with her new job. So I asked her how did she get the job, because she was working in a very prestigious Western media company. And she said she got the job because her husband knew the owner of the media company very well, and he was able to get her the job through this connection. Now, these are almost very small instances of behaviors that might be associated with corruption or informality or sort of an economy of favors, let me put it like that. But how are these behaviors different, for example, from a politician who is lobbying a public servant in order to give a contract, for them to give a contract to a company in which the politician is a shareholder? Or how is this different from a politician awarding directly contracts to his or her own friends? You see, these are instances in which it's very easy for us to say, okay, this is corruption. So today I'm here to talk to you about how to spot corruption and how to tackle corruption. It's as simple as that. And I'm going to start by explaining what corruption is, how much corruption is out there, and then I'm going to move into explaining what you can do about it and what are the benefits of deciding not to engage in corrupt practices. But let's start with the beginning. So how much corruption is out there? And I put here a map of corruption around the world. The map is produced by Transparency International, and it's based on an instrument called the Corruption Perception Index, which essentially ranks countries around the world according to the level of corruption. Visually, this map shows you which areas are most associated with corruption. And the way to read the map is the darker the color, the more corruption there is in that, perceived corruption there is in that particular country. So now you might think that if you are associated with a country that is yellow, or if you are a national of that country, or if you live in that country, you are in a very fortunate position. Well, let me tell you, that's not the case. Because like anything else in life, this instrument is also not perfect. So it doesn't really capture corruption happening at the highest echelons of power, or it doesn't capture accidental or incidental acts of corruption. It's very good for capturing systemic corruption, but not everything. Let me now give you a sense of what I understand by the concept of corruption. Like I said, it's very hard to define it, but essentially, as far as I'm concerned, corruption means sort of the intersection of three key actors. A person a public servant, let's say, or a person who's entrusted with power, who aims to obtain some sort of gain, and in doing so violates the norms of the office, thus harming a second key actor, which is essentially the public or the people who have entrusted him or her with the power, in order to give access to goods and services to a third party that would otherwise not have access to these goods and services, in exchange for some sort of benefit, may it be material or not. So, in a nutshell, corruption might be the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Now, you might legitimately think, what does this have to do with me? So, I'm not in a position of power, I'm not a public servant, I don't want to be, and so what does this have to do with me? But let me ask you, have you ever applied for a job using your parents' connections? Have you ever considered buying an essay from an essay mill, or cheating in an exam? Or have you ever been paid cash in hand? Have you ever used connections to obtain favors from a public servant? Have you used the information from your job? Have you passed it on to other people who could have benefited from that? You see, if you've done any of these things, you have been engaged in practices that can easily and broadly be put under the umbrella of corruption. And one of the most important things about corruption is that it's important to recognize whenever this happens, because by actively engaging in these practices, we're contributing to the societal norms. So if we live in a corrupt society, we contribute to the reproduction of that practical norm, which might be to give bribes to whatever, civil servants or police officers. And if we live in a society that is not characterized by rampant corruption, we might actually be involved in essentially creating new norms and institutionalizing new practices, new informal practices of behavior. So essentially we become agents in creating our own environment, and that environment is essentially unfair, is corrupt. So what do you think we could do? What can we do to avoid that? Well, there are a few things that I would recommend. First of all, choose not to be involved in corrupt practices. Choose to act with integrity. Again, this might not be as easy as it sounds, because if you live in a very corrupt society, choosing to act with integrity and, for example, not pay a bribe might come at a price. And sometimes the price might be higher than just paying a bribe. So a fine might be higher than a bribe. In other more dramatic instances, you could be excluded from your close circle of friends because you choose to not to follow the norm of the group. But there are also rewards for that, so bear that in mind. I'll come back to this in a bit. The second thing that you can do is, after not engaging in corrupt practices, is reporting them. So essentially, whenever you see something wrong happening, something that might be associated with corruption, I suggest you to report it to the police or make a complaint, or blow the whistle or leak it to the press, do something. Basically, just don't be a passive observer to what's happening around you. Because if you choose not to do anything about that particular situation, you are essentially becoming a contributor to the perpetuation of that norm in the society or in that particular context in which you live. Last but not least, my third recommendation about engaging is to check the sources of the stories that you read. We live in an era of social media, and we get most of our information about corruption or anything else in the world via our social networks. So it's very easy these days to be exposed to fake news, and these take a huge toll on the ways we perceive our societies, and based on those perceptions, how we act in our societies. So this recommendation of checking your sources and seeing how reliable these are is very important in order to have a more informed image about what is happening in the social context in which you live. And if you do so, if you do all these things, there are some benefits for the society in general, but also for you as a person. So, for example, if you choose to get involved in corrupt practices, you might benefit in the short run or even long run. Remember the case of my friend who still has the job in that company, in that media company after so many years. Or if you're a politician who awards contracts to his or her friends, obviously you will be rewarded. So there are long-term benefits. But at the same time, if you choose to not engage in these corrupt practices, you are contributing to creating your own career based on meritocracy. You are constructing yourself as a human being and as a professional based on traits that are respectable and respected outside of your inner circle. So in summary, corruption is not something that happens just out there to some people. Corruption is based on the choices we make at behavioral level in our everyday interaction. And even if sometimes a choice to engage in corrupt practices might seem reasonable at a personal level, at societal level, it might have dramatic consequences, negative consequences. So in order to tackle this, I would strongly encourage everyone to take responsibility for your own action, to look at yourself and see if what you are doing is in line with your values and if you're acting with integrity in your everyday interactions. And now I would like to leave you with a thought, and this is based on an example that I consider a success story in terms of changing behavior and acting with integrity. The example is related to India, which is a very strong emerging economy, but also it's a country characterized by high levels of perceived corruption. Research has shown, for example, that in 2019, around 50% of the inhabitants of this country have been at some level involved in corruption. In this context, there is an initiative which is called IPayTheBribe.com, which is a social media outlet that encourages people to report whenever they pay a bribe and also report the amount that they pay. I particularly like this initiative. So this was put out around 10 years ago, and I think it has more than 15 million reports by now. So I really like this initiative because this encourages people to report acts of corruption. It focuses on small corruption, on what we call typically petty corruption that happens in everyday interactions. It doesn't necessarily focus on a public figure. It doesn't vilify anyone, but it focuses on deeply changing the structures and the patterns of corruption in a particular society, because it first exposes them, and secondly, it offers citizens tools to teach them to become more aware of it, and secondly, to not to engage in corrupt practices, to act with more integrity. And I think that's a very valuable lesson for all of us to learn.
Thank you so much for that enlightening premise, Dr. Bratu. It was a pleasure to hear your expertise and your such unique ideas on a subject with such a wonderful delivery. Now, I'd like to invite you all back to University of Sussex at the end of our journey of Brighton, because like all journeys, we too must come to an end. And for the final time today, I'd like to invite our next speaker. Mubita Samata's talk acknowledges the most recent obstacle that we all have to currently face, which is life living in the global pandemic of COVID-19. They argue that social entrepreneurs serve vulnerable populations who are at most risk to the pandemic's impacts, and they're crucial to the response and recovery post-COVID. However, building social enterprises is uncertain, difficult, and painful, and often takes time, much like the recovery of clubfoot patients. What exactly can social entrepreneurs learn about the grit from clubfoot recovery? Let's tune in and listen to Mubita.
Over the years, I've learned that children teach us some of the most valuable lessons in life, right? Like how you can tear something apart to find out what it's made of and know how it works, how to pick yourself up when you fall. They even teach us life's critical lessons like how to genuinely be happy. Sometimes, however, the lessons that children teach us are unexpected. Like the lesson I'm going to share with you today that I learned from a child named Chebo. See, Chebo is a smart, wonderful young man that likes to smile and make funny faces. But there's something else that Chebo likes, and that's school. But until he was 15 years old, Chebo was uncomfortable being in school because he was born with a condition called clubfoot. Now with clubfoot, children are born with feet that are curved inwards. They're shaped like golf clubs, which makes it increasingly difficult for them to walk or to run long distances. If you neglect a clubfoot, the feet become permanently deformed, which is a source of further discomfort later on in life. And unfortunately for Chebo, it earned him a nickname in his community, the cursed child. Today, I'm going to tell you what children like Chebo can teach entrepreneurs. I will show you the benefits of learning these lessons, and I'll even show you what you can apply in your own life that Chebo applied through his clubfoot recovery journey. But first, let's talk about clubfoot. You see, 1 in 1,000 children worldwide is born with the condition. Now, while its causes are idiopathic, it's been linked to genetics and skeletal abnormalities. A clubfoot won't just go away because you've chosen to ignore it like Chebo's parents did. It needs treatment. And without treatment, the feet become permanently deformed and you need surgery to correct it. Now, what that surgery looks like is that they'll need to cut the foot and try and straighten it back into place. This can be excruciatingly painful to experience. And what's much more painful is the recovery process itself, because it can take a long time depending on the type of surgery that is done and post-operative care, among many other things. You need grit to go through this recovery process. Angela Duckworth defines grit as passion and perseverance for our long-term goals. She says grit is a better predictor of achievement than talent or intelligence. I think entrepreneurs are going to need a lot of grit post-pandemic, because since the pandemic hit last year, startups have become an endangered species. 4 out of every 10 startups is at a significant risk of running out of money. 72% of startups have had a massive reduction in their revenues, and 6 out of every 10 has either laid off or reduced the salaries of their employees because times are indeed tough. And unfortunately, they're about to become tougher because out of every 10 startups, 9 unfortunately might not make it. This is such a dire situation. When you think about it, it's sad really, but this is not the time to give up. Because what the pandemic has done is that in developing countries where people are predominantly poor, it threatens to put the lives of further 500 million people into poverty. And now more than ever, people in these vulnerable populations will not depend on their governments or market forces in order to survive. They will depend on the efforts of social entrepreneurs, because social entrepreneurs have been in the forefront of the pandemic, fighting some of the world's wickedest problems. According to the Schwab Foundation, social entrepreneurs have improved the lives of over 622 million people by providing solutions in health, in education, in water and sanitation, in environment, among many other solutions provided. And see, this is why we need social entrepreneurs, because the possibility of a world without them post-pandemic is something that is quite simply too ghastly for us to contemplate. But what will make the difference between the social entrepreneurs that succeed and those that don't, it's not their talent, it's not their intelligence, it's their passion, their perseverance for their missions, it's their grit. And Chewo's example is such a good example of what it means to have grit, because it was a journey of pain, it was a journey of patience, it was a journey of perseverance, but it later on turned out to be a journey of triumph through grit, you know. And I remember watching him recover and thinking to myself, this is such a tough kid, because I wouldn't want to go through something like that myself. But little did I know that seeing that recovery was preparing me for something that I would later experience myself, where I would need to use grit. In 2019, I decided to apply for a Chevening Scholarship. Now, the thing with Chevening Scholarships is that thousands of people apply for these scholarships every year across the world, and only between 1% to 2% are awarded the scholarship. Now, even though I believe I put in a brilliant application that year, I was one among the 98 to 99% that were good, but unfortunately not good enough. And I remember that rejection stung so much, and going through it and thinking to myself, I may as well just throw my dreams out the window. I was defeated, I was distraught, I gave up, and I remember telling myself I would not reapply because this is such a painful process to endure. But the next year, against my better judgment, I decided to throw in a fresh application. And out of the over 60,000 people that applied that year, and the over 600 local applicants in Zambia, I became one of only 13 Zambians that were awarded the scholarship. In fact, I'm the only Zambian Chevening scholar studying at the University of Sussex. See, that's grit. Grit is not about going through tough times in order to survive. It's about going through tough times in order to survive and then to thrive. In summary, what have I been talking about? I've been saying that the grit that children like Chewo show through their recovery journey is something that we all need if we're going to build back better post-pandemic. Because now more than ever, the world needs our solutions. So we need to re-examine the places where we failed. We need to go back to the doors that were closed for us and knock on them. And try again and again, persevere and have passion for these goals until we achieve them. Because post-pandemic, the world is going to need every solution we can get. Now, I end this on a good note. I'm happy to tell you that Chewo did go back to school. He can walk, he can run, and he can play sports like all of the other kids in his neighborhood. In fact, he's no longer the community's cursed child. And rightly so, because his name, Ichebo, has such a positive meaning in Bemba. In Bemba, it is a reference to the word of God. Thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you so much, Mabita, for that talk. I would really hope that the audience members take from the message that while we are all going through this global pandemic, to just have the grit and determination to see it through to the end. With that, I'd like to welcome you all to the end of the event. I really hope you've had an enjoyable time listening to all of the talks. I hope you've enjoyed the performances and the interactive games that we've ran alongside it. And I'd like to take a moment to just thank the talkers for their wonderful and inspirational topics that they've brought with them today. I'd like to thank the team members as well, who without their hard work and determination, this event would never have occurred, and it's definitely going to be one to remember. Just a little bit of extra information, the Wellbeing Wall will be available for the next week, so everyone can join in with their wellbeing practices. And don't forget that tomorrow we will be announcing the winners to all of our social media games, so please keep an eye out and good luck to everyone who entered. And with that, I hope you're all going to have a lovely weekend, and I hope you're all staying safe. See you later.